just to correct a little bit of the record, I was re-elected in 2011 and in 2015, not in 2013. Without opposition both times, and had the blessing of being able to represent District 4 of the city of Miami for 8 years. And was one of my biggest blessings in being elected mayor was not only the margin upon which I was elected, but I think in some ways more importantly for me, as someone who spent a lot of time and energy in my district and obviously cared deeply about the city, but also the district that I represented for 8 years, having been elected with 91% in District 4. That to me is something that I will always remember, and I will, it will always be something that fondly drives me forward, knowing that maybe you can't get people to agree on something all of the time, but certainly if you try hard enough and you work hard enough, you can get a significant amount of people to believe in your work, in your vision, in your work ethic, and so for me, that's something that's a gift that the residents of District 4 gave me after spending so many years working hard to make their district better, to serve them, and that vote of confidence is something that drives me in part today as your mayor. As Kachi said, you know, it is somewhat of a new beginning. You know, as the 33rd, as Greg said, mayor of the city of Miami, we still haven't disproven what I continue to say, that I was the first mayor of Miami born in Miami. And so I think that is significant. Not only because I follow in the footsteps of someone who created history, my father in 1985 when he was the first Cuban-born mayor of the city of Miami, but more importantly because now we have a city where its highest elected official was born, was raised, went to school here, went to college here in this area, and came back after law school to raise a family and to have a profession. And certainly what drives me is not only being your representative and being your ambassador, but also making sure that we have a city where my 4-year-old son, well, he's about to be 4 now in February, my soon-to-be 4-year-old son and my soon-to-be-born daughter in April can live in peace and in prosperity, and that their children and that their grandchildren and that their grandchildren's grandchildren will have a place, as Arvo was saying, that recognizes and puts a premium on the history of our city, but also is sustainable and is here for those many generations to come. I think this is the best city in the world to live in and to be in. I've traveled quite a bit, and say that not just as a homer and as someone who has lived in the city almost my entire life, the city proper, but I say that as someone who has enough world experience to say that we have a unique set of qualifications and a unique set of attributes that make our city special. And so I have a tremendous amount of energy to do this job. I am motivated by all of you, those who are give me, you know, pats on the back, and those that can be critical at times. You know, all of those criticisms and also congratulations do motivate me. They motivate me to be better, to get stronger. And you know, knowing that I'm a human being, so hopefully not make too many mistakes, but we'll work hard to honor you and honor the confidence that all of you placed in me. Some of you are not city residents, but regardless of whether you are city residents or not, I think the mayor of Miami symbolizes more than just a city. And when I travel to the U.S. Conference of Mayors that I just returned from in D.C., you can tell that Miami means more than just a city. I always say that Miami is sort of an idea. You know, it's a brand, but it's also an ideal. It's a city that is diverse. By the way, if I'm rambling on too much, you want to just cut me off.
Soon.
Okay. It's a city that is diverse and inclusive, and that's what makes us so special. But certainly we have to protect our environment, and we have to protect our natural assets to make sure that commercially and for our quality of life, we have a city that will be here for many, many years to come for our enjoyment.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to everyone. I'm going to get some questions fairly quickly, if that's okay. Of course. Our board came up with a number of questions and have different concerns. With the strong, one of them, with the strong objections of the historians, preservationists, and residents of the HEP Board and City's Preservation Office, on January 25th, commissioners voted to allow the speculator who owns the Babylon Apartments to continue doing demolition by neglect. Commissioners denied historic designation. Do you veto that decision?
So I've done a little bit of research. The prior mayor did not veto any zoning decisions of the commission in 8 years. The current vote, we also researched it, was 4-1, unfortunately, which makes it sort of veto-proof. I mean, certainly you could veto it, but it would likely be overturned. I have time to contemplate it, and I'll still contemplate it, but I think it's likely to stand, unfortunately, because of the supermajority that was received in the vote.
Okay. Basic question, why is the waterfront of Parcel B still an asphalt-covered parking lot for the Miami Heat instead of a park that was pledged by the Heat in the 1996 referendum? What leverage does the city of Miami have? Of course, it's we all know it's county related. On that area, still zoned public park, though, right? You have leverage.
On the first part of the question, I was going to say, I'll ask my father.
Right.
On the second part of the question is, what kind of leverage does the city have? Look, I think we just came out of an era where the city mayor and the county mayor did not get along for reasons that we all know. I like to, and I hope to think that that changes with my election. Certainly, a public space and activating public spaces and urban spaces into public spaces is a big priority for me. You can see that in my legislation dedicating impact fee dollars to the underline, in my work on Ludlam Trail, and with my support of Plan Z to have a protected bike path. But certainly, to the extent that we have leverage, or to the extent that we, because not everything has to be done based on leverage. You know, sometimes you can just agree on things, and you can discuss things and decide, hey, this is something that really should be activated. And I think there's no doubt in my mind that Parcel B should be an active public space, a park, for the residents of the city and the county.
Rather than
asphalt.
Or a museum. That's a big...
Yeah, you know, a lot of our museums a lot of our parks have museums on them to some extent, and that's an activation feature of the park to some extent. So, you know, what they do with their land, we don't control, whether they put some sort of museum on some part of it or not. I just want to see it active. Right now, it's a piece of, you know, garbage.
Right,
in the sense that
giving that away is a couple $100 million.
Of course, yeah. No doubt about it. No doubt about it. If I would say it's more than that, because we had a 1 acre parcel in downtown sell for $125 million. So just do the math.
Right.
It's waterfront property.
Yeah. Okay. What about Watson Island? What are you doing to oppose speculators' efforts to build a 6 to 10 story bar nightclub on the south side of Watson Island, the former trucks site? And I well remember there was supposed to be a park on Watson Island. That really hasn't happened. I just wondering what you can do toward that.
So I passed a resolution a while ago that requires the city to use whatever is available for park space. There's just not that much available. Right. And you know, as you know, I tried to make the case along with Commissioner Russell to hold Flagstone in breach of their contract, because we took the position that they had not commenced construction on time. And they also defaulted by failing to provide financial documents that were required under the agreement to lease, which would assure the city that they had the financing to build the project, which was part of their phase requirement. You know, we have rezoned some parts of it, and you know, right now there's really nothing happening on it, and it's a tragedy. You know, from my perspective, I would like to leave office, whenever that is as mayor, having something that the community can enjoy, just like we have. I hope before I leave, and I would consider my time a failure, whether it's 4 years or 8 years or whatever, if the Miami Marine Stadium is not renovated. I mean, we're ready to go. So there really isn't any reason for delay at this point. And you know, I thank the former mayor because he listened to me after many times that he did not listen to me. Because he finally understood that we could pass a non-ad valorem bond to renovate the Marine Stadium. It was that simple. And the political will was there, the financial capacity was there. So I don't know why, you know, we didn't do it that way from the get-go, but thankfully we ultimately got there, and now we have City Commission approval to do it. We're in the process of planning the development, and or the redevelopment, I should say, better said. And as soon as that's ready to go, we'll bond out the money and get started. Exciting.
The Miami Children's Museum now includes 2 charter schools and 3 walls for LED billboards. Will you oppose the school's effort to take another 29,000 square feet of city land to increase its money-making schools?
I think the City Commission opposed it at the last meeting. And so what they did was they said that the museum could continue to take care of or landscape or have control over the operation and maintenance of the common area, of the public space, that they cannot expand at their facility. And that's something that I support.
What about the boat show? Do you support the continuation of the boat show, Miami Boat Show on Virginia Key? How would you reconcile public use and access for many winter months versus the long weekend of the boat show takes that space?
I do support it. You know, I was one of those at the beginning that said we could not enter into a long-term agreement right away. Partly because obviously I was concerned about Key Biscayne and their lawsuit, but I think, you know, we have an obligation. I say the city has an obligation to some extent, you know, not overactivate our assets like we've done in the past at times. But we do have an obligation to all the city to activate some of our assets. It's a huge revenue producer. I think it generates $1,200,000 a year. And I think the boat show has, you know, been successful at managing the issues that were big concerns, at least most of them, which is the traffic, you know, ingress and egress, which is actually done in a pretty unique way where they taxi in, water taxi in thousands of people in attendance, and also the county did a great job the first year in particular where they actually videotaped the cars coming in so that they could sort of do a post-mortem analysis of how things could be better. I don't think anyone necessarily, I mean, at least not that I've heard, maybe I'm wrong, I certainly could be wrong. I don't think anyone necessarily objects to the boat show today, the way that it is. I think the bigger concern is multiple boat shows or multiple major events that take up a lot of time, deactivate the park for much time. I am upset about the fact that we were promised and I've said it publicly, a flex park, and that never happened. There was no flex to the park, and there's no real park to the park if you think about it, because it's asphalt. So I'm not even sure how you call it a park. Just like Parcel B, I guess. But, you know, it could be. Well, that's on the county side, but yeah. But I was very upset about the fact that, you know, when you go out there to the public and you say something's going to be a flex park, it should be a flex park. So that's something that we can look at in conjunction with the renovation of the Marine Stadium. Because I do think it needs to be more publicly activated. And one of the things that is happening, and we saw it today with the MLS announcement, is that there is a huge need in the city, I can tell you this, for soccer fields. And it's a big tension because the sodded, and I wish Kevin Kerwin would have been here, our parks director, but a lot of our parks are sodded, and the continual soccer use degrades very quickly the sod. And so what we're seeing is a lot of parks and a lot of facilities are going to an artificial turf-like facility to handle the volume.
Several members have brought to my attention the proposal for 50 mooring slips in the historic basin that we talked about a little bit before, for yachts up to 60 feet long. This scheme would seriously kill the ability of a lot of people, up to 60-foot long boats. So in other words, would basically kill the Miami Rowing Club and a lot of the stuff that they could do with dragon boats and things like that. What's your position on that?
It's the first I hear of it. Today I was as surprised as you were. As you know, I fought to keep out the expansion of the Rickenbacker site to slips in the historic marina basin. So I'm a little surprised to see that there are people in the administration still talking about activating, hyperactivating, I guess is a better word, that space. As I said, we have a new manager that's been in charge for about 2 weeks, and a new police chief for about 2 days. So I can tell you that our manager has been very swift in making changes. Maybe more swift than some would like, and maybe more swift than the city of Miami is accustomed to. We seem to have a little bit of an immune system response to change, like a viral immune system response. And so those things are happening. But that, to your point, to your question, it's something that I'm going to look into and see how far along that is and what is the justification for that. Because again, the Virginia Key, big reason why we fought that plan to add additional slips into the basin was because number one, it was historic, but number two was part of the Virginia Key Master Plan and the oversight board that you and I helped create with your leadership, and you were the chair of that board for pretty much its entire existence until recently. So there's a couple things that concern me about it, not just the fact that it seems to run afoul of some of those things.
Yeah, one of our concerns is in the Virginia Key Advisory Board, things pop up at the last minute. There's not real good consideration. It comes from the planning department, and is there a way to change the way that comes from the planning department so there's more orderly process?
It absolutely should be. I mean, if you want to be serious about the procedure, I think that the prior administration, without trying to be overly critical, I just don't. I would always tell them, look, if this organization, if this board is going to be meaningful, you have to consult them. And that's the point. The point is, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to agree with them every time, but there has to be a thoughtful and a real consideration. And I think, unfortunately, and I think part of the reason why this lease is mired in litigation was because they didn't listen. They didn't heed my warnings twice. The first one, we had to blow up the first RFP, and the second one is under legal challenge based on reservations that I expressed on some of the deeds in the property. So it was a rush to get it out, and I think oftentimes when you rush just to get it done, maybe for some political reason, ultimately it ends up sort of backfiring. And so
I do want to express thank you to you specifically for helping to create that Virginia Key Advisory Board. Your leadership at a critical time was really important. We all worked very closely and creatively, I think, in pulling that together. So thank you. Why did you allow Outfront Media, formerly CBS Outdoor, to convert perhaps hundreds of billboards and LED billboards? And one thing that I've noticed too is commissioners all get significant pots of money, that they can dispense to different groups, nonprofit groups. So it's clearly a system that's been going on for a while. And I guess this question, though, in terms of hundreds of LED billboards, is raising the stakes quite a bit.
Yeah, I want to thank Peter for that question. I appreciate it. Look, again, I was born and raised in Miami, and I think of myself as a city boy, city kid. And so, and he and I have talked about this issue a lot over the years. there have been moments where I've, been supportive of some of his initiatives and ideas and positions, and there have been moments where I haven't. To be fair, I always grew up with billboards, and I always thought that they were sort of part of the urban landscape. Maybe that's a flawed way of thinking, but that's kind of how I grew up. I just saw them there, and I always felt that they were like urban trees, I guess, if you will. So that's just how I grew up. And so to me, they were never, I used to tell Peter, I walked my district, thousands and tens of thousands of homes, and never did any resident of the city that I met with, that I interacted with, complain about them.
So it's kind of like an elitist issue in your mind?
No, it's not. It's not about, look, I think everybody has a right to have a position on something. And I think we're better because of that. That's my perspective. So I'm better because Peter pushes me on that issue, in my opinion. In other words, he doesn't just accept, and I don't just accept, what is my position. I've evolved in the position, I've grown in the position, there have been times where I push back as well. So I think, it wasn't a big concern for me when I was first elected. It's much more of a concern for me now than it was then. I see other people's perspective on it, and I see the other side of it. And I do believe that we ought to be a beautiful city. And I think beauty is an asset of the city. And we don't do enough, for example, to beautify our city. So, and certainly the city's not clean, in my opinion. It's not sufficiently clean. And after Irma, I still think there's a lot of work to do to bring the city up to the quality and the standards that I think it should be at.
Question about parks. The city ranks last or second to last in park space per capita of major cities in the country, as I'm sure you know. What more will you do to fix that problem? What properties are you buying to give us more park space? What procedures?
Every single thing that I can. Every single thing that I can. I think parks are the only asset that the city has that is of infinite value, other than its people, obviously. But what I've done is, as commissioner, I created a pocket park program where we use impact fees to acquire parcels, individual parcels throughout my district, because it's very difficult and very expensive to aggregate large parcels. I mean, again, I go back to that 1 acre parcel in downtown that was $125 million. I think you have to be creative. I do think you have to repurpose urban spaces. So, and you've seen that in other cities across the world, certainly in New York with the High Line. You have to take what is otherwise an urban space, like underneath an elevated train, and make it sensational. And we have that opportunity with the Underline. You have an abandoned, essentially, rail yard in Ludlow Trail, and we have an opportunity. It's a continuous multi-mile trail, and we have an opportunity to repurpose it for park and for recreation and for leisure. And so I think there are some that say that a city is defined by its public spaces, and I believe that. I'm a believer in that.
A Baywalk.
Oh, I mean, a Baywalk is a no-brainer. I mean, one of the things I've done is meet with the mayors of other cities, and I met recently with Bob Buckhorn from Tampa, and this was even before I saw him at the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and he extolled the virtues of the Riverwalk in Tampa and how it has transformed Tampa. And you look at the High Line in New York, how it has transformed the Hudson. I mean, what's interesting is that, when you create these public spaces, not only are you creating an asset that has infinite duration and infinite value, but you are creating a lot of value in terms of real estate. Just as a pure real estate guy, I can tell you that you're creating a ton of value because people can now take their kids. And by the way, that's the biggest criticism of cities, is that cities don't invest enough in parks. And so I will do everything I can in my power to try to change that statistic meaningfully. And I think it starts with the Underline and the Ludlow Trail, because those are long, large assemblages that we can activate immediately.
Although some came to me. What ways will sea level rise change the manner in which Miami addresses hard choices in planning for the future? What are the political pressures in this regard? Why does the city continue to approve high rises in areas guaranteed to flood?
That's a multi-part question, so let me answer it in phases. The first thing is, we did something that most cities haven't done. And interestingly, maybe ironically, probably ironically, we got the grant to do it from a Republican-controlled state legislature, which is probably very unusual to many in this room. And that is to do an update to our stormwater master plan to take into account sea level rise. It was a grant from the state for $1,250,000. And we're in the process right now of updating our stormwater master plan to take into account sea level rise. For us, climatic events are not speculative. For some, they may be. For some, there may be a debate about whether sea level rise or climatic events occur or how they occur. For us, it's part of our life. I mean, I know many of you saw the images of Brickell underwater during Irma, 4 to 8 foot tidal surge. I'm sure many of you have seen king tide flooding, no rain, twice a year. And I know many of you have seen, because I know I've experienced, the abnormal amount of rainwater that we're getting annually. And what's interesting is we build our projects, our CIP projects, to what's called a 5-year rain event, meaning that in theory, the system is only supposed to be overwhelmed one time in 5 years. That's how much capacity we have. Except it gets overwhelmed 5 or 6 times a year. So clearly, there's an incongruity between the amount of rain we're getting and the supposed capacity we have. So I think, the third piece of it is that something happened last November that I honestly was surprised to see happen, which is that the voters of the city of Miami voted to tax themselves to the tune of $400 million to address some of our big problems. Affordable housing, something I've talked about and legislated on for many, many years. Cultural facilities and infrastructure and resiliency. And so when I say the word resiliency, I think we have graduated from sustainability 1.0 to resiliency 2.0. And I think resiliency 2.0 is not just having a resiliency officer, not just being on the 100 resilient city list from the Rockefeller Foundation, but now we are finally investing a significant amount of resources to address this issue. And we need to address it because other people are addressing it on their terms. When you look at a city like New York, where it's cold, there's a heck of a lot more buildings and more density. 100,000 people per square mile. Here in our densest, we're at 24,000 people per square mile. And now you have a state income tax that is no longer tax deductible on your federal income taxes. It is very difficult to make the case to live in New York versus Miami. And so what they're saying is, why are you going to move to Miami? You're going to be underwater. And so that has a branding issue, marketing and branding issue in terms of investment. We certainly want to make sure that insurance companies know, I mean, Gachi knows and many of you know that you can't have a real estate transaction. Most real estate transactions will not happen without insurance. You can't sell or buy property. I mean, you can if it's cash. But, and I know we're coming out of a cash cycle, if you will, so that's not as unusual as it would normally be. But most of the time, properties are sold with leverage. And so if the property's not insured, it's not going to be sold. So that creates a huge economic problem. And then of course, you have the existential threat. I mean, like I started off in my comments, I want the city of Miami to be around for my son, my daughter, and their grandchildren, and their grandchildren's grandchildren. So we have to, we definitely have to prepare for these existential threats as well. But my goal is to make Miami the most resilient city in the world. And that means climatic resiliency, that means resiliency to terrorism threats, that means resiliency in terms of our energy infrastructure, and that means resiliency in terms of class and the tale of what I call the tale of two cities, and sort of class warfare that you see sometimes in cities when there's a huge divide between the haves and the have-nots. And so that's part of my mission.
What are your initial thoughts on dealing with the latter issue that you just brought up?
The latter issue,
that's a tricky one.
I think I try to keep it simple, And the way I keep it simple is, in a family economy, in any economy, there's costs, right? There's expenses and there's income. Simple. And so the three greatest expenses in a family are shelter, food, and fuel, right? So I don't think we have any part to play in food per se. We don't really regulate food prices. But certainly with affordable housing and the affordable housing initiatives that we have created through our CRA, through entitlement programs, through this bond, and through potential future entitlements and potential future extensions of CRAs, you have a ton of resources to address housing, one of the biggest expenses. The other biggest expense is transportation. And I've been pushing a mass transit expansion for a few years called the SMART Plan. I created it. Well, I didn't create the plan. Well, I did create the plan. And I named it too. I try not to take full credit for it because it was approved by the FPO, which is now the TPO. So I know you guys got to keep up with the acronyms. But the point is that every major city in the world has effective, efficient, low-cost mass transit. And if we don't do it, if we continue to sit on our hands and not do it, I'm going to tell you what's going to happen. The private sector is going to innovate around us. And that's what they've been doing. And that's what they're going to keep doing. And so I can envision a world very, very quickly that if it doesn't have mass transit, with the ubiquity of teleconferencing that we have, where most people will just start working from home. Because, and you're seeing that with WeWork, which is, by the way, a company, and I met its CEO in Washington, and they were telling me they're not doubling down on Miami, they're tripling down on Miami. From a $60 million investment to a $200 million investment. And what you're going to see is buildings that are built with 3 or 4 floors of WeWork space. It doesn't have to be WeWork the company, but it'll be multi-purpose space. You're going to see when automated cars come into effect, most people won't own cars. And so many of our parking garages will be reconverted or will be converted to office space. And so people will live and work in the same place. They don't have to commute to work. Commuting to work will be a thing of the past. And then all of a sudden, these roads that we see will be surplus. So guess what we can do with them? Parks.
Okay. I want to get to your questions in a couple minutes because I know you're going to move on to the city of Miami taxes and fees are up 50% in 7 to 8 years. Burden on local taxpayers. Without getting into the millage rate, what will you do to reduce taxes and fees?
You can't answer that question without addressing the millage rate. So that's sort of a distorted question. The millage rate, which is the taxable rate that government controls, has gone down since I was a commissioner. What continues to go up are our property values, and they're going up significantly. 37% in the last 3 years, 52% in the last 5 years. And the reason why they're going up is because people want to be here. Plain and simple. I've said this a bunch of times in a bunch of forums. We are a victim of our own success. There is a finite amount of land. It's not growing out of any. We're not Dubai. We're not making island, condominiums, thankfully. Although there's one over there. Swire. Brickell Keep. But aside from that, we're not creating more land. And so we have a finite asset and what seems to be an infinite pool of people who want to chase that finite asset. What I'm seeing is investment from all over the world wants to come here. Places I never knew were interested in Miami are interested in Miami now. So again, we have to figure out a way to make sure that whatever success and prosperity the city is experiencing, that's a success and prosperity that filters down to everybody. And so, like I said before, I talked about the 2 cost sides, but I think the income side is making sure that in a family, making sure that we have good paying jobs for our children and for ourselves. So I do believe that Amazon is a big deal coming to Miami. Without getting into a debate about subsidies that Al might want me to get into. I I think Amazon is good for the city, and Amazon-like companies and technology-based companies are good for the city. I do think we need to continue to diversify our economy, and I do think we are in a knowledge-based era. And so if we don't, as a city, continue to promote tech-based businesses, we're going to get further and further behind. And I think we do have wonderful organizations like Emerge and Endeavor, which are putting us on the technology map. But again, I was up at the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and I was on a panel, I didn't even know how I got there, with the mayor of Louisville, Mayor Fisher, who's brilliant. The first mayor ever to have a chief innovation officer in his city. The mayor of Austin, and the mayor of San Jose, which is the largest city in Silicon Valley, and myself, so 4 of us. I was the young guy. And but they're brilliant mayors. I mean, we have these brilliant mayors with brilliant ideas, but it is make no mistake about it, we're in a global competition. We're in a global competition for jobs. We're in a global competition for industry. And we need to make sure that our children, every single child, no matter where you come from, has a premium education and has the ability to succeed in that knowledge-based economy. That's one of my missions. I don't care what neighborhood they grow up in. I don't care what neighborhood they were born in. We need to be able to look at ourselves in the face as members of this community and say that our children have a chance to succeed in this economy.
Okay, I know you're running out of time, so get a couple more questions and get questions. You work with Coral Gables City Attorney Craig Lean to promote legislation for people with special needs. From a conversation you and I had, I was shocked with your sensitivity regarding the continuing educational needs for young adults with special needs beyond simple job training. Most people just say job training, etc. Yet this is a population that does not have wide political clout. What do you propose to bring greater funding and focus to their needs?
Listen to people like you that are experiencing having children with special needs. I think we are defined in part by how we take care of the most vulnerable, the most disenfranchised. That's just my philosophy. That's my religious philosophy. And that certainly influences how I view my role as your servant-in-chief. And so, I think for me it's about listening, and it's about empathizing or sympathizing, if I can empathize, sympathizing, and soul-searching and realizing that we have to do better and we have to do more so that these children who become adults have a place to live, can be productive members of our society, so that their parents can feel a sense of greater inclusion, and we as a society should do everything that we can in our power to make those families feel a part, they feel the support that they deserve.
We have a couple minutes here. Oh, okay, good. I'll give you a broad scale one. We have a couple of questions from the public. You're a registered Republican, my understanding. Can you, in Miami, comment on the role of Donald Trump as President of the United States in terms of such critical issues as DACA, tax reform, as well as the burgeoning power of billionaires controlling our economy and political process? That's beyond the city in one level, I realize.
I guess I can start on my question backwards. First of all, I don't view myself as a partisan person, as a partisan actor. I'm a nonpartisan office holder. I can tell you in my campaign, many of you know that I was supported by all three supposed parties, Republican, Independent, and Democrat. I'm very proud of that. And not the parties, I'm sorry, the people in those parties, I should say. I wasn't supported by all three parties. But I was supported by, for example, the Speaker of the House of Florida, who happens to be a Republican. And I was also supported by the Minority Leader of the Senate, who happens to be a Democrat. And the incoming Minority Leader of the House, who also is a Democrat. And I was supported by independents as well. So I don't really, I think part of what's broken in our country is the hyper-partisanship. I think it's a false dichotomy or trichotomy. You know, there's not one thing that I know about any of you that can define the rest of you. The way you think, the way you act, the way you behave. So I think it's a false dichotomy or trichotomy to say, oh, you must think and feel this way if you have this label attached to you. That's bogus. I think it's a money-driven system. Because if you don't pick a side at some point and you want to continue to advance politically, you're not going to be able to do it. I mean, how many independents do we have in Congress right now? 0. How many do we have in large, unless you're Mike Bloomberg, it's very difficult to be elected. And then he was a mayor. But one of the things I see that gives me a lot of hope is the mayors of this country. They, by and large, do not act on a partisan basis. They are more problem solution. So when we talk about sea level rise or resiliency, that's the way I look at it. I don't look at it as a Republican or Democratic issue. I look at it as problem solution. And so, I think that's the world will be better served if we had elected officials that were looking at the world that way. And to the extent that any of our politicians in a partisan world right now are not doing that, they're doing a disservice to their constituents.
Okay. Got a couple of questions. What's the city doing to help the artist community other than limited grants options? Is there an allotment for artists to create or for subsidies in different ways? And what do you see in terms of the trying to stimulate creativity in artists in the city?
We passed an ordinance, Arts in Public Places, and we also, which is a fund. It's not just a requirement. It's either a requirement or you pay into the fund, which is presumably going to support artists and local artists. Miami has a very thriving art community, in my opinion. I think Basel, kind of like South by Southwest and a place like Austin, has taken over the city. It's really become a multi-city event. And I was speaking about how do we keep that momentum year-round. And I think that's something that, we have come a long way when it comes to our growth in the art sector. I found it interesting that I flew in from Boston to be at the opening, the first day of our Basel of the Contemporary Arts Museum. And somebody told me that the combined square footage of the museum with the De La Cruz gallery that's right next door, if you combine them, square footage, it's the same amount of square footage as the Whitney. And I thought, wow, who would have thought that we were on that level? And so I think Miami's art community is thriving. I think that's a part of our, it's an indication of our strength as a city. It's an indication of our growth. It's an indication of our maturity as a city. And again, public spaces and art are things that people do when they have the time to do them. And so, I'm just very excited about the future of the art community in the city and its growth.
One other question. Somebody says, I'm an immigrant to the city of Magic. Will Miami be a sanctuary city?
I think that's a partisan label. So I don't really buy into that construct just because somebody else creates it. Miami is an immigrant city. We are a city full of immigrants. My parents, I'm a second generation. My dad came at 12, my mom came at 5. I don't get it. I don't get this debate. I don't get this issue, personally. I don't understand how, to me it's not a difficult issue. If you come to this country and you want to live here freely and you want to pay taxes, and in some cases, I'll take a step back, if you want to do all those things, you should be a citizen of this country. That's my perspective. Okay? Thank you. But I'll go a step further when you talk about Miami. And I'll say this, I'll quote my new city manager. He said this: Miami is one of the few cities in the world. Think about this, because when he said it, I was like, man, I've never heard anybody say this. And all the time that I'm 40 now, I've never heard anyone say this. It's one of the few cities in the world okay, where people save up all their money to visit and risk their lives to come to. One of the few cities in the world where that happens. And so I don't understand, particularly people who are risking their life to come here, how, I mean, as long as they're not criminals, violent criminals, why they wouldn't be afforded the opportunity to be citizens. So I don't like the construct. I can tell you this, the Miami Police Department, for example, has had a long-standing policy that predates this debate for decades. We do not, when we stop people, we don't ask them for their immigration papers, we don't ask them if they're citizens or they're not citizens. We stop them and we ask them for their driver's license. If they don't have a driver's license, they get a ticket for not having a driver's license. That's what happens in Miami. So there is no particular role or function that the city plays in that, other than thriving because we are an immigrant-based, inclusive city.
Last question, and I'm going to interpret it from looking at Sam Van Leer at one of your responses, and then I think his question here. And that is, you were saying that the food might not be a high cost to a lot of families in one sense.
No, I didn't say that. I said we don't control that cost.
Well, okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
All right. I guess the question that I'm interpreting here, Sam, maybe I have it wrong, is there can be more community gardens.
Sure.
More community composting, and I'm just wondering in terms of what the city can do to assist in those efforts.
No, I agree. I mean, I think, Marvin Dunn had a beautiful project in Overtown called Roots in the City. And certainly the Overtown CRA can support that, and I'd be supportive of that. And I'm supportive generally of repurposing empty lots for food gardens and using them to supply our local restaurants. So absolutely, I think one of the things we are doing is we did do a project in Overtown because Overtown was a food desert. There were no supermarkets, things that we take for granted oftentimes where we live. And I remember when we voted on that choice supermarket, as an Overtown CRA member, thinking to myself, sort of doing the math on how many Publixes or Winn-Dixies were walking distance from my house. And there was 3. Walking distance from my house. There was one on 37th and 16th, there's a one on 32nd and Core Way, and then there was one on Lejeune, right past Core Way, all in walking distance from my house. Actually, there's another one that's kind of walking distance too if I want to walk a little past 8th Street on 37th Avenue as well, close to Flagler. So that's 4. There's another one on 27th between Coral Way and US 1, and that's 5. So, this is something that's ubiquitous in some areas, and yet in others, there are none. And so I think we have to strive for that equality, for that equity, to make sure that our children have the same ability to get nutritious food in all neighborhoods.
The actual structure of the question was this. The City of Miami Solid Waste Department used to operate composting on Virginia Key, and they used to offer free compost to people to build gardens with, and we used to build gardens with this compost. It was delivered on request. Wonderful. Not perfect stuff, but effective. I spoke with the director of solid waste.
You don't like my compost?
No, I didn't say that. I
Just
said
kidding,
it wasn't
I was just joking.
Hey, I take compost seriously. Anyway, I spoke with the director of solid waste, and he said that the equipment still exists. It's ready to go.
Let's do it.
So would you support reactivating
Absolutely.
this?
Yes.
Awesome.
100%.
Thank you. Thank you very much for taking your time. I know we've got some more questions here, but I know you've got to do elsewhere.
Sorry. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.